The graduation night at Bridgeport High School was filled with laughter, music, and joy. The hall was decorated with garlands, and the students, dressed in their finest attire, danced and took photos. Ethan Carter, wearing a sharp black suit, felt both excited and sad. It was the end of one chapter of his life and the beginning of another. But in his heart, there was something unspoken that he couldn't ignore. He noticed Jessica Reynolds in the corner of the room. She was wearing an elegant deep blue dress that accentuated her eyes. She was smiling, talking to her colleagues, but Ethan sensed a hint of sadness in her gaze. He knew this was his last chance to tell her how he felt. Ethan approached her, his heart pounding so loudly he feared everyone could hear it. Jessica noticed him and turned, her smile warming as she congratulated him on graduating. But Ethan interrupted her, saying he needed to talk to her privately. Jessica, slightly surprised, agreed. They stepped into a quiet hallway, where the music from the hall was muffled. Ethan began to speak, his words sincere and full of emotion. He told her how her lessons had changed his life, how her passion for literature had inspired his own dreams. He confessed that he had always felt deeply for her, feelings that went beyond mere respect. Jessica listened, her face a mix of surprise and confusion. She knew Ethan was a talented and sensitive young man, but she had never imagined his feelings for her ran so deep. She herself had felt lonely for a long time. Her last relationship had ended years ago, and since then, she had thrown herself into her work. But in that moment, looking at Ethan, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. She slowly stepped closer to him and, without a word, kissed him. It was a soft, tender kiss, full of unspoken emotions. Ethan, stunned, kissed her back, and in that moment, everything else faded away. They forgot about the school, the graduation, and the boundaries that separated them. In that moment, they were just two people connected by something real. Jessica led him to an empty room where they could be alone. She explained that she no longer worked at the school, her contract had ended, and she was no longer his teacher. This knowledge removed the last barriers between them. They talked about their feelings, their struggles with loneliness, and how their meeting had changed their lives. Their connection was not just physical, but emotional. They shared their dreams, fears, and hopes. Jessica told him about her plans to move to another city to start a new life. Ethan, in turn, shared his ambitions of becoming a writer. They understood that their paths might diverge, but in that moment, they were together, and that was all that mattered. The next morning, Jessica woke up with a feeling she couldn't describe. Memories of the night mixed with anxiety and doubt. She knew her actions had been impulsive, but in that moment, it had felt right. However, Ethan didn't call, didn't text, didn't reach out. She tried to convince herself it was just a fleeting moment, that he was young and had probably already forgotten her. But deep down, she felt that wasn't true. Weeks turned into months. Jessica returned to work at the school, trying to focus on her lessons and students. But her thoughts often drifted to Ethan. She caught herself looking for him in the crowd of students, even though she knew he wasn't there. His absence left a void in her life that she couldn't fill. One morning, feeling slightly unwell, Jessica decided to see a doctor. The test results came as a shock. She was pregnant. Her first reaction was panic. She sat in the doctor's office holding the results, unable to believe what was happening. Her thoughts raced. What should she do? How would this change her life? But despite the fear and uncertainty, she already knew the answer. She decided to keep the baby. Jessica understood that this decision would change her life forever. She knew Ethan might never return, that she might have to raise the child alone. But in her heart, she felt a firm conviction. This child was a part of her, a part of Ethan, a part of their brief but bright story. She couldn't give that up. Jessica began preparing for her new life. She continued working at the school, but her schedule became more demanding. She tried to save money, knowing she would soon need more resources. Her colleagues noticed changes in her behavior. but she wasn't ready to share her news. Only her close friend Sarah knew the truth. Sarah supported Jessica, helping her process her emotions and plan for the future. They discussed how Jessica could balance work and motherhood, what steps she needed to take to provide a good life for her child. Jessica felt grateful for the support, but deep down, she still hoped Ethan would reappear. Meanwhile, Ethan, who had vanished without a trace, was going through his own struggles. After graduation, he had left Bridgeport, traveling across the country to find himself. He moved from city to city, taking odd jobs and trying to figure out what he wanted from life. He wrote, filling the pages of his journals with thoughts about the past, present, and future. But despite the distance, he couldn't forget Jessica. Her image haunted him in his dreams and waking moments. He often remembered that night, their conversations, her smile. He felt he had left something important unfinished, but the fear of disrupting her life kept him from reaching out. Nearly 6 months had passed when Jessica began to notice the first signs of her pregnancy. She tried to hide her condition, but in a small town, secrets didn't stay hidden for long. Soon, rumors spread through the school, and Jessica realized she would have to tell the truth. One evening, as she was returning home, a stranger stopped her. It was Ethan's father. He looked worried and said Ethan had disappeared and they didn't know where he was. Jessica, despite her feelings, promised to help if she learned anything. A few weeks later, Ethan returned to Bridgeport. He hadn't planned it, but something inside him told him he needed to be there. He went to the school, hoping to see Jessica, but instead, he met her colleagues, who told him about her pregnancy. Ethan was stunned. He couldn't believe he was going to be a father. His first instinct was to run to Jessica, but fear and uncertainty stopped him. He spent a few days wandering the town, trying to gather his thoughts. Finally, Ethan made up his mind. He went to Jessica's house, his heart racing and his hands trembling. When she opened the door, their eyes met, and in that moment, everything became clear. They both knew their lives would never be the same. Jessica invited him inside, and they began to talk. Ethan admitted he had run from his feelings, but was now ready to take responsibility. Jessica, in turn, shared her fears and hopes. They both understood that many challenges lay ahead, but in that moment, they were together, and that was all that mattered. "23-year-old Emily Carter lived in the small town of Bridgetown, Ohio. She worked at the local library, loved reading, and dreamed of traveling. Her life was calm and uneventful until one evening when everything changed. Emily was walking home from work when she was attacked by an unknown man. He dragged her into a dark alley where he assaulted her. Emily could barely remember his face, only his dark eyes, low voice, and the smell of cigarettes. She screamed, but no one was around. The next day, Emily reported the crime to the police. Detective Jacob Reynolds, an experienced investigator, took on the case. He interviewed Emily, collected evidence from the crime scene, but the perpetrator left no DNA traces. The only thing the police had was a description: a man about 6 feet tall, with short dark hair, wearing a black jacket, and smelling strongly of tobacco. Weeks and months of searching yielded no results. The perpetrator seemed to have vanished. Emily felt helpless. She stopped sleeping at night, afraid to go out alone. Her psyche was shattered. On her friend's advice, she started seeing a psychologist, Dr. Lisa Morgan. The sessions helped, but the fear and pain lingered. 5 years passed. Emily moved to a neighboring town, Hartford, to start a new life. She got a job at a bookstore, trying to forget the past. One day, a man walked into the store. He introduced himself as Michael Bennett. He was around 35, tall, with dark hair and a piercing gaze. They struck up a conversation, and Emily felt drawn to him. Michael was charming, intelligent, and had a sense of humor. They started dating. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt happy. Michael was caring, but sometimes he would leave at night, saying he had urgent work. Emily didn't ask too many questions. She trusted him. One evening, Emily saw a news report on TV. Another assault had occurred in the city. The victim described the attacker, a tall man with dark hair wearing a black jacket. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. The description was all too familiar. She began to notice oddities in Michael's behavior. He often disappeared at night, returning tired, sometimes with scratches on his hands. Once she found cigarettes in his jacket, even though he claimed he didn't smoke. Emily started to suspect that Michael was hiding something. Emily decided to test her suspicions. She secretly followed Michael when he left at night. He entered an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Emily called the police, but by the time they arrived, Michael was gone. Inside the warehouse, they found signs of a struggle and women's clothing. The police launched an investigation. Detective Reynolds, who had handled Emily's case 5 years ago, got involved again. He suspected a connection between the new crimes and the old case. Emily decided to confront Michael. She asked him directly, "Are you the one attacking women?" Michael initially denied it, but then his expression changed. He smiled, and something sinister flashed in his eyes. "You've always been smart, Emily," he said. When Emily realized that Michael was the man who had destroyed her life 5 years ago, she was overcome with terror. She tried to run, but he was faster. Michael grabbed her arm, his face twisted with anger. "Did you think you could escape me again?" he hissed. Emily struggled, but he struck her on the head. Everything went dark. Emily woke up in a cold, damp basement. Her hands and feet were tied to a chair, a gag in her mouth. She tried to move, but the ropes dug into her skin. A dim light bulb flickered in the corner, casting shadows on the grim room. Tools hung on the walls, making her shudder. After a while, Michael came down to the basement. He looked calm, almost indifferent. He sat down across from Emily and removed the gag. "Do you want to know why I do this?" he asked. Emily remained silent, her heart pounding. Michael began to tell his story. His childhood was filled with pain and humiliation. He grew up in a poor family, where his father was an alcoholic, and his mother was a victim of his abuse. Michael often watched his father beat his mother and could do nothing. One day, when he was 12, his mother left them and ran off with another man, leaving Michael with his father. After that, his father became even more violent. He blamed Michael for his mother's departure and often beat him. Michael began to hate women, seeing them as traitors and the source of all his suffering. As he grew older, this hatred turned into something darker. He started taking revenge on women who, in his mind, resembled his mother. "You were one of the first," Michael said, staring at Emily. "You even smelled like her." Emily felt despair wash over her. She understood that Michael was mentally ill, but that didn't justify his actions. Michael kept Emily in the basement for several days. He brought her water and food, but only spoke to her about his exploits. He told her about his other victims, how he chose them, how he planned his crimes. Emily felt like she was losing her mind. She prayed that someone would find her. On the third day, the police showed up at Michael's house. They had come to ask him a few questions about a recent assault. Michael acted calm, but when the officers heard faint moans coming from the basement, they grew suspicious. "What's that?" one of the officers asked. Michael tried to distract them, but it was too late. The police went down to the basement and found Emily tied to the chair. Michael tried to escape, but they caught him quickly. During the interrogation, Michael confessed to everything. He told the police about his victims, including Emily. His testimony helped solve several cold cases. Michael was charged with multiple crimes and sentenced to life in prison. Emily returned to her psychologist. It was hard for her to cope with the trauma, but she knew she had to keep living. She started writing a book about her story to help other victims of violence. Michael remained in her past, but his shadow haunted her for a long time. This story is about the importance of fighting for justice and never losing hope, even in the darkest moments of life. Emily found the strength to move forward, and her story became an inspiration to many.